Hello all you lovely people out there, and welcome to the first part of Bomb Month. Yes, that's right, to celebrate the upcoming 100th review, I've decided to devote this and the next 3 reviews to films that were, well, failures. The first film we open with, fittingly, is a film that was supposedly so bad the director had to send out letters to people apologizing for it. Oh boy.
What a swell party this is!
Precisely! It's great! It's grand!
It's wonderland! It's top! It's first!
It's too fun!
Our story here is one that is effectively a big nod to classic Hollywood musicals of the 1920s and 30s, and follows the kind of plot that was standard for the time. A group of rich young people about town, made up of a playboy, heiress, performer and gambler, fall in love amidst a high society world of parties, clubs and, of course, song and dance, using the iconic tunes of Cole Porter, a famous composer of the era. The cast here all do well with the rather straightforward material here, all playing archetypes from these films. Reynolds is sufficiently self-confident and smooth as the playboy, and is able to sport a sleek pair of white pearls when he needs to. Shepherd, as the slightly airheaded yet sharp-tongued heiress, also does a decent job, though at times she can get a little overbearing and grating. But she plays off well and is a fitting counterbalance to Reynolds' smoothness, though slight bit of slowness. And then, of course, the comic relief provided by the one and only Madeline Kahn, along with Duilio de Petre as the singer and gambler respectively. These two are great fun to watch and inject a much needed sense of pep and zest to the proceedings. And what's more, being from working backgrounds, their characters play off very nicely against our two more higher up leads, often being much more direct and forward in their actions and statements, and not being quite as refined. And as far as the singing goes, our main 4 aren't half bad, though Kahn and de Petre fare the best, being experienced singers. Reynolds and Shepherd aren't bad by any means, but Reynolds in particular guffs a few lines here and there, especially when he has to move about as he sings, stumbling his words a couple of times. However, the show stealers here are John Hillerman and Eileen Brennan as the servants of Reynolds and Shepherd respectively. Hillerman maintains a wonderfully straight face and stiff upper lip attitude throughout the whole movie, no matter how silly things get, while Brennan brings the street-smart sass and bluntness, and it is a pitch-perfect contrast to the songs and antics of our quartet. Some of the film's biggest laughs come from either him just taking things in his stride when people suddenly burst into song, or Brennan just giving a very blunt assessment of the situation and being very direct in her sentiments. From a visual standpoint, the film replicates the aesthetics of the classic musicals rather well, recreating the look of those Art Deco sets and studio backlots dressed up as whole streets with a predominantly black and white color scheme, or black and white in color, as director Peter describes. However, the dancing, by comparison, another key trope of 30s musicals, is a little flat and often feels rather basic and uninspired when compared to the more elaborate and almost poetic grace from the kinds of moves that Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire became famous for pulling off. Here it just amounts to a couple of arm gestures and some foot taps. Nothing really all that special. But the score and songs by Cole Porter do help enhance that bubbly and artificial atmosphere and are definitely the big highlight of the movie, with a lot of snazzy, often silly and sometimes innuendo-laden numbers like Did You Ever, Find Me a Primitive Man and Let's Misbehave. These were what the film was built on, and Bogdanovich, for everything else, made an excellent selection of vibrant and colourful songs that do add much needed gusto to the film. But now, after all that jazz, now comes the script, also written by the film's director Bogdanovich, the man also responsible for Paper Moon, What's Up Doc, Mask with Cher, and The Last Picture Show. Although no stranger to comedy or homaging the classics, this was probably the lightest and fluffiest film that he had done up to this point, as well as the most blatant in its tribute to a certain era of cinema. However, for all these good intentions, the film does still have issues. Primarily, it's the writing that's to blame. which seeks to both pay tribute as well as make fun of these kinds of films. However, Bogdanovich seems to have gotten the mixture slightly off, and more often than not, the writing, in particular the dialogue and jokes, come off as smarter than they actually are and seem more smarmy than genuinely funny. The writing tries to have that rapid-fire wit and spark you'd expect from a high society farce, with our main four constantly spitballing between each other. However, most of the laughs actually come from the songs or just Hillerman's reactions to the whole thing, which only amounts to about half of what is meant to be a musical comedy. I can't quite nail what exactly is wrong here, if it's just the choice of words that Bogdanovich uses that just aren't very funny or allow for much spark, if it's just the actors not being able to deliver the lines right, or if the film just isn't directed with that kind of high energy that such an approach demands. Frankly, it's kind of saddening when the highlight of the verbal comedy is an old lady talking about seeing a man's lighthouse. Plus, for a musical with such a then high-profile cast and director, it doesn't really have much of a grand finale or big showy set-piece numbers like you would think. In fact, it's one of the more understated and restrained musicals I've ever seen when it comes to spectacle, and if you're looking for more of that, New York, New York from Scorsese, another notorious musical leveler that didn't do well upon release, is much more up your alley. In fact, it's actually fitting I mention it as, though both films are associated with the decline of the second Hollywood Golden Age, both use a similar foundation and take very different roads with it. New York, New York meshed those classic aesthetics and numbers with a sometimes more down-to-earth and often not always pleasant script, in keeping with Scorsese's brand of storytelling, whereas At Long Last Love very much feels like just another in a long line of these sorts of films. Between the two, New York, New York took much more chances and had a much bigger and more satisfying finish with the amazing happy ending sequence. At Long Last Love just feels very safe, and I think that is the biggest shame here. It never feels like the film really exploits making fun of the fluff and pomp that a lot of these musicals were, nor does it have as much spectacle and show as those films did either. Really, this needed someone like a Mel Brooks or a Gene Wilder to really punch it up and pump in some much needed energy and mania into it to better complement Porter's playful songs, as well as make better use of the setting. However, that's not to say that At Long Last Love is boring or even as bad as its reputation may suggest. By going for a more low-key approach, what Bogdanovich has ended up making is actually a basic, almost beginner's musical, if you will, and that could be of interest to those who don't normally like musicals and want something a little more down-to-earth and less flashy. And of course, as I mentioned before, the songs in Hillerman do pop up regularly enough for the film to always have something going on and not suffer dry spells like some musicals can do between big numbers, which again this film does not have that many of. If you're curious, the film, after many years, has finally been put out on an on-demand Blu-ray from Fox with a new director's cut, as the theatrical version that got all the bad reviews in the first place was a byproduct of studio pressure and meddling. I also imagine that most streaming services will also have this version up. It's worth seeing, if for nothing else, it's as an interesting bit of film history, and a sort of time capsule on where musicals were cinematically during that time period. This was still a good number of years before the likes of Chicago would fully resurrect the genre. And so, to close off, I must give At Long Last Love a Bronze Star. It lacks the charm and the scope to allow it to rise to some of the genre's greats, but it still offers a perfectly watchable and fairly amusing musical, and not a bad way to kill 2 hours if I say so. And so we conclude part 1 of Bottom Month. Join me next time for part 2, where we look at the 1985 historical epic Revolution starring Al Pacino. See you there.